She was asked to leave. You don't get asked to leave the Navy because things are going well. My father said that with a bourbon in his hand, and 6 of my former classmates hanging on every word. He said it the way he's said it for 10 years. Loud, certain, like a man delivering a verdict to a jury that stopped deliberating a long time ago. I was sitting 12 feet away. I didn't turn around. I took a sip of my drink and set the glass down without looking at him. They don't know that yet. Tomorrow morning, at 0800, 40 officers in dress whites would stand at attention, while a retired vice admiral pinned a second star to my shoulder boards. Tomorrow morning, I would be Rear Admiral Cressida Thornhill, upper half, United States Navy. But not tonight. When I pulled into the gravel lot of the Elks Lodge in Grady, Georgia, the air was exactly what I remembered. Pine-heavy, thick with the kind of southern dusk that doesn't cool down so much as settle, pressing against your chest like a hand you didn't ask for. The sky had gone the color of a bruise along the tree line, and cicadas were already grinding their one-note sermon into the dark. No one was waiting at the door. No wave from the porch. Not even a nod from the 2 men smoking near the handicap ramp. Just the muffled sound of country music bleeding through screen windows and the clink of ice in glasses I couldn't see yet. I sat in the rental car for a moment, engine off, hands on the wheel. The Third Fleet Challenge coin in my coat pocket pressed against my thigh through the fabric. I'd carried that coin for 8 years. Vice Admiral Esterhaus had placed it in my palm the day I took command of my first destroyer, off Yokosuka. It was heavier than it looked. Most things that matter are. I didn't come back for approval. I came back because Grady County High School holds a reunion every 5 years. And somewhere inside that building was a version of me that still existed in other people's memories. The girl who'd left for Georgia Tech at 18 with a duffel bag, and a silence that no one in this town had ever learned to read. Growing up in the Thornhill household meant understanding one rule above all others. Leonard spoke. Everyone else listened. He'd been sheriff of Grady County for 30 years. Retired 9 years ago. Still introduced himself as Sheriff Thornhill at the hardware store, at the diner, at the Baptist church on Route 19. The badge was gone, but the weight of it never left his voice. He treated every room like a briefing he was running. He interrupted women mid-sentence. He stood when he talked so that everyone else had to look up. I was the intense child. Too curious, too quiet, too precise. I asked questions he couldn't answer, and he never forgave me for it. When I graduated with a master's in systems engineering and told him I was going to officer candidate school in Pensacola, he laughed. Not a cruel laugh. Worse. A dismissive one. The kind that said he'd already decided what I was, and nothing I did would change the filing. I left quietly. No big send-off, no family dinner at the lodge, just a bag packed with precision and a Greyhound ticket south. I didn't look back. What they didn't know, what I never explained, was that the silence wasn't shame. It was operational habit. 20 years of surface warfare teaches you that the most dangerous thing in a room is the person who talks before they think. I'd learned to be the other kind. I stepped out of the car, smoothed my coat, walked across the gravel in flats that made no sound. The screen door wheezed open and the smell hit me first. Pulled pork, slow smoked, the vinegar tang of Carolina sauce, sweet tea in mason jars sweating on paper tablecloths, pecan pie cooling on the counter near the kitchen window, its crust cracked in a way that meant someone had rushed the lattice. I cataloged all of it the way I catalog everything. automatically, without sentiment. The main room was pine-paneled, ceiling fans turning slow, one of them wobbling on every rotation like it couldn't commit to the job. Class photos lined the far wall in mismatched frames. I scanned them as I walked toward the bar. Leonard's sheriff portrait hung dead center, formal, pressed tan uniform, badge catching the flash, shoulders squared like a man who'd practiced the pose. Beside it, a photo of him shaking the hand of some state legislator. Below that, a group shot from some Rotary Club banquet. Not a single photo of me. Not my commissioning. Not my first command. Not the ceremony where I took a carrier strike group through the Strait of Malacca and brought every sailor home. I was the blank space in the family narrative. They hadn't just forgotten me, they'd rewritten me. Denial, I would learn, was their specialty. I found a stool at the end of the bar, ordered bourbon, neat. The bartender, a kid who couldn't have been older than 22, poured without conversation. Good. I wrapped my fingers around the glass and let the noise of the room wash over me. Laughter, the scrape of folding chairs on linoleum, someone's wife telling someone else's wife about a kitchen renovation. And then Leonard's voice, cutting through all of it the way it always did. Not because it was loud, because it was designed to carry. He was standing near the buffet table. 6 classmates formed a half circle around him. 2 men I half recognized from calculus class. A woman named Peggy, something who'd sat behind me in English. 3 others I couldn't place. They were holding plates of pulled pork and coleslaw and looking at my father the way this town had always looked at him. Like he was the final word on everything. "You know Cressida's here tonight," he said. Not to anyone in particular. To the room. I saw her car pull in. Someone murmured something I couldn't hear. "Look," Leonard said, lowering his voice just enough to make people lean in. That was his trick. The volume drop? The implication that what came next was sensitive, private, shared in confidence. "I don't like talking about it. She's my daughter. But people ask me, and I'm not going to lie." He paused, sipped his bourbon. Let the silence do the work. "She was asked to leave. Simple as that. Some kind of disciplinary matter. She won't talk about it, and I respect that. But you don't get asked to leave the Navy because things are going well." Peggy shook her head slowly, sympathetically. One of the men clicked his tongue against his teeth. "She couldn't hack it," Leonard continued. "And that's fine. Not everyone can. But she won't admit it. She's got some desk job now, answers phones at some office near the base in Norfolk. Won't talk about it. Won't come home for Thanksgiving." He shrugged. The practiced shrug. The one that said, "What can you do?" If she'd really done something important, don't you think we'd know about it? Laughter. Soft. The polite kind. The kind that agrees without committing. I didn't flinch. My hands stayed where they were. One on the glass, one in my lap, 3 inches from the challenge coin in my pocket. The scar across the back of my left hand, thin and white, caught the light from the bar lamp. A steel cable snap during an underway replenishment in the South China Sea. I never explain it to civilians. I never explain anything to civilians. Even the ceiling fan seemed to hesitate. That wobble stretched a half beat longer than it should have. I took a sip. Set the glass down. I didn't look at him. They had crafted this story carefully. Or rather, Leonard had crafted it, and the family had let it cure like concrete. 10 years of repetition. Every Thanksgiving, every funeral, every reunion. The same quiet assassination delivered in the same quiet voice. She was asked to leave. She couldn't hack it. She answers phones. My Aunt Darlene, Leonard's younger sister, had questioned it once. 5 years ago, at a cousin's wedding, she'd pulled Leonard aside and said, "Are you sure about all that?" Cressida never struck me as someone who'd wash out of anything. Leonard had told her she was being naive. Darlene hadn't asked again. Tonight, Darlene sat 3 tables from the buffet, nursing a glass of white wine, watching her brother hold court. She didn't look at me. She didn't not look at me. She existed in that careful middle distance that families build when they've decided someone's story has already been told. The thing about silence is that it isn't always passive. Sometimes silence is the sharpest answer. I had commanded Destroyer Squadron 7. I had taken Carrier Strike Group 11 through 2 Western Pacific deployments. I had led Fleet Modernization Initiative Pacific Forge and saved the United States Navy $310 million over 5 years. My tactical call sign across both Westpac deployments was Ironside. I had been recommended for flag rank by a 3-star admiral who said in writing that I was the finest surface warfare officer of my generation. And my father told people I answered phones. A man at the far end of the bar set down his glass. He was older, mid-60s, silver hair cropped short, navy blazer over a white Oxford shirt, no tie. His posture carried something his clothes didn't advertise. He'd been sitting there when I arrived. I hadn't noticed him. I should have noticed him. He turned his head. Not fast. Slow. The way someone turns when they've just heard something that confirms exactly what they drove 600 miles to hear. His gaze found me. Steady. Assessing. It moved across my face, down to my hands, and stopped on the scar across my left knuckles. Held there. Then it moved to my coat pocket, where the outline of the coin pressed faintly against the fabric. Something shifted in his expression. I didn't know what it meant. I looked away before I could find out. Then a classmate named Greg Cooper pushed back from his table and wandered toward the bar, 3 beers past careful. Greg had done 4 years in the Navy, petty officer 2nd class, aviation boatswain's mate. He'd been telling anyone who'd listen all night about how carriers work. He set his beer down 2 stools from me and leaned toward the group at the end of the bar. "See, what people don't understand," Greg said, warming to his favorite subject, "is that a Nimitz-class carrier displaces about 90,000 tons. That's basically a floating city. And the weapons systems on those things, the old Aegis rigs, they're running baseline 7 or whatever." He said it with the confidence of a man who'd mopped the flight deck and decided that made him an expert on strike group operations. I didn't plan to say anything. "Aegis baseline 9 Charlie," I said without looking up from my glass. "And the displacement on a Nimitz class is 101,600 long tons at full load, not 90,000. The integration refresh alone took 18 months of sea trials." Greg froze, beer halfway to his mouth. The glass stayed there. His eyes moved to me, and then away, like he'd just touched a wire he wasn't sure was live. At the far end of the bar, the man in the navy blazer set his napkin down. He placed both hands flat on the wood, and he stood. "She was asked to leave," Leonard repeated to a new pair of ears near the buffet line. "You don't get asked to leave the Navy because things are going well." He laughed. The room laughed with him. The man in the blazer began to cross the room. Leather shoes on scuffed hardwood, each step measured, unhurried. The walk of someone who had commanded fleets and never needed to rush for anyone. He stopped 3 feet from Leonard's group. He adjusted his cuff. and he opened his mouth. The room didn't notice him at first. Leonard was mid-sentence, refilling the same lie for a woman in a floral blouse who'd arrived late and missed the first performance. His bourbon was low. His voice was not. "Excuse me." 2 words. That was all it took. The woman in the floral blouse turned first, then the 2 men from my calculus class, then Peggy, then Leonard. The man in the navy blazer stood with his hands clasped loosely behind his back, feet shoulder-width apart, weight centered. It was the posture of a man who had spent 4 decades standing on the bridges of warships, and his body had never unlearned it. His silver hair was cropped close enough to see scalp at the temples. His blazer was pressed but unadorned. No medals, no ribbons, no insignia, and none were needed. The clothes were civilian. The man inside them was not. "Vice Admiral Jack Esterhaus," he said. "United States Navy, retired." He let it land. He didn't rush past it. He didn't soften it with a smile or a handshake or a pleasantry about the weather or the pulled pork or the fine turnout tonight. He just let the rank sit in the air like a stone dropped into still water. Leonard's glass stopped halfway to his mouth. I watched from the bar. I did not move. My fingers rested near the challenge coin in my coat pocket. The scar on my left hand caught the light again. I didn't look away. Greg Cooper, 2 stools down, set his beer on the bar without making a sound. His lips were slightly parted. He knew what a vice admiral was. 4 years on a carrier deck had taught him that much. A vice admiral is a 3-star flag officer. A vice admiral commands numbered fleets. A vice admiral does not appear in the Elks Lodge in Grady, Georgia, on a Friday night by accident. Leonard recovered first. He always recovered first. 30 years of running a sheriff's department had taught him how to fill silence with authority, even when the authority wasn't his. "Well," Leonard said. "Welcome. You from around here?" "Pensacola," Esterhaus said. "I drove up this afternoon." "Long drive for a reunion you're not part of." Leonard smiled. The sheriff's smile. The one designed to remind everyone whose jurisdiction they were standing in. Esterhaus did not return it. "I'm not here for the reunion, Sheriff." The word landed with surgical precision. Not Mr. Thornhill. Not Sir. Sheriff. The retired title offered back like a mirror held up to a man who didn't realize how small his reflection had become. "I'm here," Esterhaus continued, "because a mutual colleague, Captain Thomas Bell, called me 6 weeks ago and told me something I initially refused to believe. He told me that a retired county sheriff in South Georgia had been telling anyone who would listen that Rear Admiral Cressida Thornhill was asked to leave the United States Navy." The room changed. I felt it before I saw it. The way a ship feels a sea state change before the first wave breaks. Conversations at adjacent tables didn't stop all at once. They thinned, and then died. The way sound dies in a compartment when the commanding officer steps through the hatch. Peggy's fork stopped moving. One of the men from calculus class set his plate on the nearest table as if he'd suddenly lost his appetite. The woman in the floral blouse took 1 step backward. Leonard's glass was still suspended. It had not moved since Esterhaus said his name. "Now, I thought Captain Bell must have been mistaken," Esterhaus said, "because no reasonable person would fabricate a story like that about a flag officer in the United States Navy. So I drove 600 miles to hear it for myself." He paused, and I heard it. 3 times in the last 40 minutes, from your mouth. Leonard's jaw tightened. I could see the tendon in his neck from 12 feet away, the vein above his collar, the slight tremor in the hand holding the bourbon. He had never been outranked in this room. Not once. Not in 30 years as sheriff. Not in 9 years of retirement. He had walked through every door in Grady County knowing that his title was the ceiling, and no one in the room could touch it. The ceiling had just been removed. Esterhaus did not look at Leonard. He turned his body 45 degrees and looked at me. Not past me. Not through me. At me. The way a flag officer looks at another flag officer, with recognition, with respect, with the quiet understanding of shared authority that civilians cannot see and do not possess. "Admiral Thornhill," he said, "it's been too long." He crossed the remaining distance to the bar. He extended his hand. To me. First. Not to Leonard. Not to the host. Not to anyone in the half-circle of classmates still holding their plates of pulled pork like they'd forgotten what food was for. To me. I stood. I took his hand. His grip was the same as I remembered from the bridge of the Blue Ridge. Firm, brief, professional. The handshake of a man who does not perform. "Admiral Esterhaus," I said. "It has." Behind him, the room had gone so quiet I could hear the wobble of the ceiling fan. That same half-beat hesitation. Even the ice in Leonard's bourbon had stopped clinking. "You still carrying that Third Fleet coin I gave you off Yokosuka?" Esterhaus asked. I reached into my coat pocket. My fingers found the coin the way they always found it. By weight, by texture, by the 8 years of muscle memory that comes from carrying something you earned in a moment that no one in your family ever asked about. I set it on the bar. The eagle and anchor caught the light from the overhead. Third Fleet. Commander, U.S. Third Fleet. The inscription around the rim read, "Ready Power for Peace." Esterhaus reached into his own blazer pocket. He set his coin beside mine. They matched. Same fleet, same era, same weight pressed into the same brass. 2 coins from the same command, carried by 2 officers who had served on the same bridge, now resting side by side on a bar in South Georgia, while a retired sheriff tried to remember how to breathe. Esterhaus looked at the coins for a moment, then he turned back to the room. His voice did not rise. It didn't need to. A man who has commanded Third Fleet does not raise his voice in an Elks Lodge. "I served with Admiral Thornhill when she was my operations officer aboard USS Blue Ridge," he said. "I watched her plan and execute strike group operations across 2 Western Pacific deployments. I reviewed her command record when she took Destroyer Squadron 7. I endorsed her for Carrier Strike Group 11. He paused. Let each sentence settle like a round finding its target. I personally recommended this woman for flag officer. I will be pinning her second star at 0800 tomorrow morning at Naval Station Norfolk." Darlene Mitchell's hand went to her mouth. It was involuntary. I could see it from where I stood. Her fingers pressed against her lips, and her eyes went wide and wet, and the glass of white wine in her other hand tilted just enough that a thin line ran down the stem. She looked at me. For the first time all evening, she looked directly at me. Not with the careful middle distance, not with the polite pity of a family that had accepted Leonard's version. She looked at me the way someone looks at a person they are seeing for the first time. "She commands more firepower than most countries possess," Esterhaus said. He said it simply, without emphasis, the way you state a fact that requires no embellishment because the scale of it is embellishment enough. Peggy's fork slipped from her hand. It hit the linoleum with a bright, thin sound that carried further than it should have. No one picked it up. Esterhaus turned to Leonard. The shift was physical. I could see it in the rotation of his shoulders, the way his weight transferred, the way his gaze narrowed by exactly the degree necessary to communicate that what came next was not a conversation. It was an accounting. Your story, Sheriff, reached a junior officer stationed in Yokosuka last year. Esterhouse's voice dropped half a register. That officer questioned Admiral Thornhill's authority during a critical fleet exercise. The exercise had to be resequenced. 3 days of operational planning discarded. Assets repositioned across 2 time zones. He let the silence stretch. Do you understand what that costs in operational readiness? Leonard's face had gone the color of old paper. The bourbon in his hand trembled. A single drop ran over the rim and down his knuckle. He didn't notice. I didn't. His voice cracked. The sheriff's voice. The one that had filled every room in Grady County for 30 years. It cracked like a cable under too much strain. She never... I set my glass down gently. I looked at my father. At the man who had spent a decade telling this town I answered phones. At the man who had laughed when I told him I was going to OCS. At the man whose portrait hung on the wall of this lodge, while every trace of me had been erased from the family record. But you did. 2 words. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Leonard's arm dropped. The bourbon glass hit the edge of the buffet table and tipped. Amber liquid spread across the white paper tablecloth in a slow, widening stain that no one moved to clean. His mouth opened, then closed, then opened again, but nothing came out. He looked around the room for an ally, for a nod, for someone to step forward and confirm the story he'd been telling for 10 years. For someone to say, yes, Leonard, you were right. She was asked to leave. She couldn't hack it. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the ceiling fan seemed to hesitate, that wobble stretching a half-beat longer than it should have. Esterhouse reached down and picked up both challenge coins from the bar. He placed mine in my hand. He held my gaze for 1 second longer than protocol required. It wasn't ceremony. It was confirmation. Admiral Thornhill. He leaned in close enough that only I could hear. Your car or mine to Norfolk? You've spent your life being the biggest badge in a small room, I said. I wasn't looking at the room. I was looking at Leonard, at the man who had filed me away in a drawer, marked failure, and never checked again. But some rooms are bigger than you can imagine, and I stopped shrinking to fit yours a long time ago. I let the words settle. I didn't wait for a response. I didn't want one. I folded my napkin beside my untouched plate of pulled pork and coleslaw. I picked up the challenge coin from my palm and slid it back into my coat pocket, where it settled against my thigh with the weight of 8 years and 2 oceans. I finished the last half-inch of bourbon in my glass, set the glass down gently, centered on the napkin. Then I stood. The bar stool didn't scrape. I'd stood the way I've stood from every briefing table for 20 years. Weight forward, shoulders level, no wasted motion. You didn't want the truth, Leonard. I used his name. Not Dad, not Daddy, not Sir. The name on his birth certificate, stripped of every title he'd ever borrowed from the county. You wanted a confession. You wanted me to come home broken so the story you told would hold together. But I was never broken. I was deployed. He didn't speak. His mouth was still open. That tremor in his hand had spread to his shoulder. The paper tablecloth under his spilled bourbon was soaking through to the wood underneath. A dark stain, spreading outward like an accusation finding its own edges. I looked at Darlene. Her fingers were still pressed against her mouth. Her eyes hadn't left me since Esterhouse said the word second star. I didn't say anything to her. Not yet. Some things need distance before they can be said honestly. I turned toward the door. The screen door was propped open with a brick wrapped in duct tape. The same brick, the same duct tape, grayed and peeling. Some things in this town hadn't moved in 30 years. I walked through it. The screen clapped shut behind me. The sound was thin and final, like a file being closed. Pine air. Cicadas. The gravel crunched under my flats. Behind me, the Elks Lodge sat in its own silence, the country music still playing from the speakers inside, but no one left to hear it the way they'd heard it before. Esterhaus fell into step beside me in the parking lot. He didn't speak until we reached my rental car. Then he stopped, hands in his blazer pockets, looking up at the Georgia sky where the bruise-colored dusk had gone full dark, stars beginning to press through. "You could have told them yourself," he said, "any time in the last 10 years. "I know. Why didn't you?" I looked at the scar on my left hand. Thin. White. A steel cable snap during an underway replenishment in the South China Sea. I never explain it to civilians, because even if I had told them, they wouldn't have believed it. He'd already decided what I was. They followed. That's how chain of command works, Admiral. Even the wrong ones. Esterhaus nodded. Not agreement. Recognition. The recognition of someone who understands that some battles aren't worth the ammunition, and some aren't yours to fight. "Your car," he said. "I'll meet you in Norfolk." I drove south through the dark. 212 miles of interstate. Pine trees thinning into flatland, then flatland giving way to the tidewater sprawl. The glow of Norfolk rising against the horizon like something I'd earned. The challenge coin sat in the cup holder. The radio stayed off. Silence had always been the language of my life. Other people filled rooms with noise and called it authority. I filled ships with readiness and called it nothing. Because the work doesn't need a name. The work needs to get done. If you've ever sat in a room where someone was rewriting your life and you had to let them finish, hit that like button and subscribe. I thought about Leonard standing in that Elks Lodge with bourbon soaking into the tablecloth, and no one left to corroborate his version of me. I thought about the 10 years of Thanksgivings and funerals and reunions where he had performed my failure like a one-man show, and the family had bought tickets every time. I didn't feel anger. I felt the absence of it. The quiet that comes after a sea state drops from 5 to 2, and the ship settles into its own rhythm again. That was the last night I answered for Leonard Thornhill's story. 800. Naval Station, Norfolk. The morning was sharp. October sunlight cutting clean lines across the parade ground. 40 officers in dress white stood in formation, their uniforms so bright against the gray concrete that the whole scene looked like a photograph someone had overexposed on purpose. Captain Anne Sullivan, my chief of staff, met me at the entrance to the ceremony hall. She was carrying a garment bag and a small leather case. Inside the case, 2 shoulder boards with 2 stars each. "Good morning, Admiral," she said. Her voice carried the quiet precision of a woman who ran a flag officer's staff the way a watchmaker runs a movement. Nothing loose. Nothing wasted. "Good morning, Captain." She handed me the case. I held it for a moment, felt the weight of it. Not heavy, not light. Exactly what it was. Inside the hall, the chairs were arranged in rows. 40 officers, commanders, captains, a few junior flags, all surface warfare. All people who understood what the second star meant, not as a symbol, but as a scope of responsibility that most civilians couldn't comprehend. Esterhaus stood at the front in his navy blazer, ribbons pinned to the left breast in 4 precise rows. He had driven through the night. His shoes were mirror-polished. He wore every ribbon. Not for vanity, for the record. The ceremony was brief. That's how Navy ceremonies work. Brevity is the point. The service speaks for itself. The chaplain opened. The orders were read. 20 years of service. Officer Candidate School. Surface Warfare Qualification. Department Head. Executive Officer. Commanding Officer. Guided Missile Destroyer. Commander. Destroyer Squadron 7. Commander. Carrier Strike Group 11. 2 Western Pacific deployments. Fleet Modernization Initiative Pacific Forge. $310 million in documented savings across 5 fiscal years. Recommended for flag rank by Vice Admiral Jackson Esterhaus, Commander, U.S. 3rd Fleet, retired. Sullivan removed my 1-star shoulder boards. Esterhaus stepped forward. He took the 2-star boards from the leather case. His hands were steady. He pinned the left board first, then the right. Each pin clicked into place with a sound no louder than a heartbeat. He stepped back. He saluted. I returned it. It wasn't obedience. It wasn't performance. It was the weight of a career measured in sea miles and sleepless watches and decisions made at 3 a.m. in a combat information center while the rest of the country slept. 40 officers saluted. I held the moment for exactly as long as protocol required. Then I stepped to the podium. I'd like to announce the establishment of the Thornhill Leadership Fellowship, I said. $85,000, awarded annually to a junior female surface warfare officer, demonstrating excellence in operational readiness and fleet modernization. I paused. The name is mine. The purpose belongs to whoever comes next. The applause was measured. Professional. The kind that doesn't need volume because the room already understands. 3 weeks passed. I didn't call Leonard. He didn't call me. The silence between us was no longer a weapon he wielded. It was a border I had drawn. I learned through Darlene, eventually, what happened after I left the Elks Lodge. Leonard had stood at the buffet table for 11 minutes without speaking. Peggy and the 2 men from calculus class had left within 5 minutes of my departure. Greg Cooper had closed his tab and walked to his truck without saying goodnight to anyone. The woman in the floral blouse had asked Leonard quietly if what the Admiral said was true. Leonard had replied, "I need some air," and walked to the parking lot, where he sat in his truck for 45 minutes with the engine off. He didn't attend the next Rotary Club meeting. He stopped introducing himself as Sheriff Thornhill at the hardware store. Not because he'd found humility, because the story that had propped up his authority in that town for 9 years had been disassembled in front of witnesses by a man who outranked him by a distance Leonard couldn't calculate. It wasn't forgiveness that undid him. It was fact. The portrait still hangs in the Elks Lodge. I've been told. I haven't been back. A handwritten letter arrived at my office at Fleet Headquarters 3 weeks after the ceremony. No return address on the envelope, but the handwriting was careful and slanted left, the way Darlene Mitchell has always written, pressing too hard on the downstrokes. 4 words. I should have asked. I pinned it to the corkboard above my desk, beside the 3rd Fleet Challenge coin. Not out of forgiveness, not out of nostalgia, but because someone finally admitted the silence had 2 sides. There is power in patience. There is freedom in truth, even when it arrives 10 years late and smelling like pine air and pulled pork and the bourbon your father spilled when the world he'd built out of your silence collapsed under the weight of a single handshake. I work at a fleet headquarters now. No explanations. No corrections. No one at my command has ever heard Leonard's version of me, and no one ever will. Just Cressida. If you enjoyed this story about quiet competence winning over loud arrogance, hit that like button and let me know what you think in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell for more stories just like this one. Thanks for watching.